Hello Foxes, welcome back to another OSRS lore video. This is the lore behind Great Kourend. Make sure not to miss next week's lore video about Tyrowin. It's the last in the short series, but it's definitely not the least. Do you like using custom emojis? Tired of waiting for my videos to drop? Want to get to know me? Becoming a channel member not only helps me grow, but gives you a ton of perks too. You'll find the link in the bio below. Thanks Foxes. Great Kourend was established from people fleeing from the mainland because of the God Wars. At this time, only Arceus, Port Piscarilius, and Lithkren existed, led by leaders of their houses. Basidius and Shazian were founded later during the Dragonkin Conflicts. The general of Zamorak, Skatizo. After Skatizo's betrayal and decimation of the expedition team, he took an artifact from the Kourend temple and fled to Zaya. He ended up making it there before the refugees that would go on to found Arceus, Lithkren, and Piscarilius. Using this newly stolen power, he created the Catacomb of Kourend, which involved summoning a large variety of monsters. It wasn't until later that the catacombs were enchanted to prevent the monsters from leaving. The events after this are still a mystery, but Skatizo remains deep beneath the catacombs to this day. Dragonkin Conflicts. Starting after the God Wars, these conflicts lasted 100 years. The elder god Jas left a stone behind that was named the Stone of Jas. Their Dominists refer to it as the Eye, as it's said to have created all life and magic. Saradomin and Zamorak ended up abusing the Stone of Jas during the God Wars, and unfortunately, the Dragonkin were unable to stop them. This resulted in the Dragonkin being tortured by Jas's curse, sending them into violent rages which led them to attacking human settlements. This started at the beginning of the Fourth Age. The Dragonkin became nearly unstoppable as most weapons had no effect on them. It wasn't long, however, until humans found weapons from Kessi, a world containing an advanced civilization, that were able to harm the Dragonkin, which started to turn the tide of battle. Zorgoth, a Dragonkin, wasn't about to let that happen, so he started experimenting with other Dragonkin. He used dragons, which were bred from lizards infused with their lifeblood, and injected them with certain fungi in an attempt to breed a stronger and more aggressive Dragonkin that could turn the tide of battle back into their favor. After hundreds of trials, they were successful, giving a green dragon heightened aggression in a laboratory on Crandor. As the experiments continued though, they moved their operations to a new lab on Ungal, and thusly decided to work with blue dragons instead of green. This research resulted with two dragons that were stronger, but even less aggressive. They were named Vorkas due to their undead nature, but in a fit of rage, Zorgoth destroyed one. He ordered the construction of the Lithkren Vault on Lithkren as the operation started to grow bigger, but eventually, the humans discovered it, forcing Zorgoth to abandon everything. He even left behind the last Vorkath as an obstacle. Lunar Sea, Battle of Lithkren. Lithkren held the largest laboratory, and they experimented on all sorts of creatures, like demons and specters. Soon, sailors noticed the Dragonkin architecture and began to take alternate routes. This piqued the interest of four heroes, Robert the Strong, Avias, Gamora Shazian, and Tristan Corvo. The heroes led an assault and soon found themselves in front of a Dragonkin protecting grandiose doors. The Dragonkin was slain, but not before he claimed the life of Avis. This assault caused the vault to go into lockdown, trapping Zorgoth within. The four heroes decided to split the dragon key that was left behind into 4 key pieces to be hid around the world, afraid of what lay beyond those doors. Robert hid 2 key pieces, one in Ungal and the other in the Kourend temple in the Karazi jungle. Tristan buried 1 key piece in Mortmire Swamp, and Gamora traveled far west to Zaya, eventually founding Shazian and burying her key piece with her when she died. Her coffin was placed in the depths of the Shazian crypts. This alone did not stop further conflicts from happening. After the battle on Lithkren, Robert and his panther Odysseus made it to the Dragonkin castle and confronted another Dragonkin. Poor Odysseus was slain, but Robert managed to avenge his panther and escape with his life. It's believed that the conflicts between the humans and Dragonkin ended sometime after this. In 2,000 years, during the 5th Age, Dallas Jones, a dragon expert, would unknowingly open the Lithkren Vault, freeing Zorgoth. While being trapped, Zorgoth had managed to create the ultimate weapon, Galvek, a dragon with elemental powers and the ability to control the minds of other dragons. Zorgoth, with his newly found freedom, slaughtered Dallas and started amassing dragons on Ungal. He was forming an army to launch an assault on the human kingdoms. Not wanting to leave this threat unchecked, the kingdoms of Gielinor, Asgarnia, Misselin, Kandrin, as well as the Fremnik province, Berthorpe, and Camelot, stood united and planned an assault on Ungal. There were casualties from all kingdoms, including Bob the Cat, but in the end, the assault was a success, killing Galvek and Zorgoth. The Rebellion of the Five Houses. This took place in the 6th BA, before the Accord of Kourend's timeline. The lords of all 5 great cities mounted an insurrection against the reign of King Radha III. Directly following this, they established the Council of Elders, who ruled jointly before moving on to a rotating monarchy within the signing of the Royal Accord of Twill. This was a document which detailed the transition of authority from the Council of Elders to the Royal Lords of the Five Houses, thusly making a Grand Lord of Great Kourend for 1 decade. The Long Winter. North of Great Kourend, an entity of unknown origin ravaged the land, causing them to experience perpetual winter. This was a big problem as livestock and crops were freezing. This entity would become known as Wintertide. The kingdom's attempts to subdue it failed, leaving it to ravage the lands for another 3 decades. Fearing the beast may try to harm Great Kourend, Lord Arceus I ordered the Great Library to be built and stuffed full of books, documents, and research from all cities in order to preserve the history of Great Kourend. Although more important texts were stored in a section of the Tower of Magic known as the Library Historical Archive for additional protection. Din. There once was a legendary master smith who resided in Lithkren, and his name was Din. It's believed he lived during the 4th Age before Xeric took control. He is known as the greatest smith of all time, and some of his works still exist to this day. One of the most notable accomplishments he has is the prison he constructed to contain Wintertide. The prison had sturdy magical doors made of lovakite and bruma bark. It was named the Doors of Din and has lasted for a very long time. He resided just west of Lithkren on a small peninsula that was originally named Din's Redoubt, but is known today as the Forsaken Tower. Din's bulwark was made here, along with various other items. On Xeric's orders, the tower was raided by Zamfir, one of Xeric's closest comrades, and had most of Din's inventions stolen. Din's legacy was forever tarnished by this as they took the stolen inventions back to Mount Quidamortem. A dwarven smith named Udor asks an adventurer to go recover Din's fabled hammer in order to repair the doors of Din. They were successful, luckily, as Udor informs them it's the only tool that can repair the doors of Din, which for the first time since their creation were starting to fail. The exact reason for this is unknown, but they think it's most likely due to sabotage. Breaking of the Accord. The cycle of succession continued until 1048 when, using the military under his command, Lord Shazian III seized control of Great Kourend and crowned himself king. He abolished the Royal Accord with the writing of the Royal Charter and formed the State of Kourend, which would serve the monarchy, govern revenues, and mobilize forces. In 2547, King Shazian VI ended up marrying the daughter of Lord Hosidius, Anaya Hosidius, which led to their sons taking the throne 4 decades later under the name King Hosidius IV. He ruled for 4 decades before giving the throne to his own son, who became King Hosidius V. He ruled until the early 33rd decade. The Great Expedition. King Shazian VII took the crown in the early 33rd decade. He was madly obsessed with the Dark Altar and spent most of his time in the Tower of Magic performing experiments on his citizens. Wanting to expand his territory, he ordered an expedition into the Kebos lowlands, which were west of the kingdom. After 3 days, they returned with news of a mountain beyond the swamps of the region. The king assigned Magnus Rimmer to put together a team and gave them 250 days to ascend the mountain and return with their findings. The expedition was deemed a failure as they never returned, assumed to have perished in the field. Thusly, the mountain would become known as Mount Quidamortem, which meant certain death in Latin. The king at this time had a prison built beneath the Tower of Magic. He also had a temple constructed in a cave on the western side of the mountain during the 37th decade. Created within this cave was another altar that gave off a similar power to the Dark Altar, and, though it was unstable, it was able to magnify the Dark Altar's power, allowing it to reach areas it previously couldn't. This is when the lizards living in the Kebos lowlands were experimented on, resulting in the creation of the corrupt lizardmen. In one of King Shazian VII's journal, he spoke of compatible creatures for mass reproduction, suggesting he was making lizardmen as an army for Great Kourend. Records indicate that this process was achieved by using dark magic to breed humans with lizard creatures. Battle of Concourse. King Shazian VII had been a very unpopular king. This was due mostly because he was regularly kidnapping and experimenting on the citizens of Kourend beneath the Tower of Magic. He was slain during the Battle of Concourse during the 37th decade, which lasted for 100 years, but his body was never found, which also led his people to believe that he was resurrected as the mage Xeric, who took the crown only a few days after King Shazian VII's death. It was clear to see he had moved his spirit from his old body into an incorporeal one. The Age of Strife. This is the time in Kourend's history where the mage Xeric ruled, right after the death of King Shazian VII. He was slain during the coup d'etat carried out by elder warriors in an attempt to stop the king's violent reign, although it seemed he was able to move his spirit into a different body and now calls himself Xeric. King Xeric, with his newfound powers, killed the rulers of the 5 cities and used the Dark Altar and Lizardmen to exert dominance over the kingdom. He would command the Lizardmen to sweep cities, kidnapping the citizens for experiments. During this, many fled past the Kebos lowlands. Deciding to settle, they founded the kingdom of Varlamore. A new group formed in the 43rd decade called Hacks, Humans Against Xeric, and attempted to storm and defeat Xeric at the Tower of Magic, but failed, resulting in the loss of 200 of their men. Xeric has left a lasting mark on Great Kourend, and because of his severity and cruelty while ruling, his entire reign has been named the Age of Strife. Byrn's Revolt. In the 47th decade, a farmer by the name of Byrn saw a lizardman guard kill a child and became outraged, killing the lizardman by himself with the whole town as a witness. Byrn urged them to revolt with him. He and the other citizens, after 7 days, had drove the lizardmen back past Kingdom's grounds to the Kebos lowlands. During the revolt, the Dark Altar was destroyed, further weakening Xeric, which led him to flee to Mount Quidamortem. Having made Xeric flee, Byrn was crowned king. During his rule, he created the Kourend Royal Guard as he did not like that the Shazian house had full control over the Shazian army. He ruled for 3 decades, and so did his son. The Ascent of Arceus. During King Byrn II's reign, Troban Arceus and his brother-in-law traveled to Mount Carolam to seek the aid of the Tasakal, a golem-like race. This is because Troban's wife had become very sick and he wanted to ask them for help. Help they did, as they granted Torben knowledge of immortality, which indeed saved his wife. He would then proceed to share his newly given knowledge and secrets with the citizens of Arceus, allowing those who chose so to be immortal as well. Those who did were granted new bodies from the Dark Altar to house their souls. War of the 5 Houses. This is a civil war nearing the end of the 4th Age, though, despite the name, Arceus never participated. King Agatha IV was overthrown in the 120th decade by the leaders of the 5 Houses, presumably because of his mismanagement of the land, which led to famine. With no heir to the throne, the Lovakenge house and the Piscarilius house formed an alliance to kill Lord Shazian, though it was short-lived as they started to fight amongst themselves. While Lord Troban reinforced his defenses, not wanting to participate in the war, House Osidius began to mobilize their forces. The exact amount of casualties is unknown, but House Osidius suffered greater losses than any of the other houses. Shazia, the Shazian castle, and Forthos, the former seat of the Hosidius house, were both destroyed. This war lasted for 20 years, even though it was often viewed as a petty squabble or war of pride. Once it ended, King Kardas I took the throne. The demonic abductions. In the 124th decade, the magic enchantment that had been keeping the creatures inside the catacombs started to waver, and no one knew why. This crisis led to monsters escaping and kidnapping citizens during the middle of the night. After an adventurer from Varlamore arrived at the family farm in Hosidius, he found out that his father had been abducted the night before, so he took it upon himself to investigate these abductions. After gaining possession of a dark totem from the demons inside the catacombs, he used it on the altar in the center, which took him to Skotizo. Unfortunately, he was slain during that encounter, and the abductions continued to happen for about a year before they abruptly stopped. It's claimed that the creatures must have been subdued by a greater power that strengthened the enchantments on the catacombs. Relations with Varlamore. During the Age of Strife, Great Kourend managed to avoid any conflict with the southwest kingdom of Varlamore. Thusly, Emperor Armafor invited the royal family of Great Kourend to attend his 30th birthday celebration. This, sadly, was done under false pretenses, as the emperor intended on poisoning the royal family of Great Kourend's drink during the grand feast at his palace in Civitas Illa Fortis. Upon the royal family's death, Great Kourend declared war against Varlamore. It's unknown if the war stopped before or during King Kardas III's reign, sometime during the 132nd to 135th year. The relationship after the war was destroyed, so in hopes of repairing it, King Kardas III ordered an envoy be sent to Varlamore to transport the royal Accord of Twill to be displayed at the Grand Museum of Civitas Illa Fortis. However, it was lost at sea until the 141st decade, where it was discovered by Artur Hosidius. Though the trust between them has never been regained, it appears that Queen Ziani Arkin, Varlamore's current leader, is eager to ease the tensions between them. To this day, the betrayal of Emperor Armafor remains fresh in the minds of Great Kourend's people. King Kardas IV. King Kourend IV's wife died giving birth to his only daughter, who he named Rose, during the 138th decade. On her 11th birthday, they made her monthly trip to Lithkren, and he bought a flask for himself and a rose locket for her. Unbeknownst to him, the flask was enchanted with dark magic and his mind soon became corrupted. An Arceus mage reached out to one of the king's advisors, David Andrews, not long after. He was an expert on old curses and told David that the king's mind was too far gone, unsavable, and gave David a potion that would aid him in killing the king. David accepted this as a truth and proceeded to kill the king. At this time, Rose was too young to lead, so they formed the Kourend Council until the time in which she could take over. The Kourend Council. The newly formed Kourend Council reached out to that Arceus mage after Rose had figured out what they had done to her father. To keep her quiet, the mage gave them a potion to use on her, but the potion was actually a poison that deteriorated her mind and kept her in a comatose state. To hide this fact, they told everyone she became insane after the death of her father and had her moved away to an unknown location away from public life. Since there were no more heirs, the council became permanent, making it a republic even though the people still refer to it as a kingdom. They ruled over Great Kourend for another 20 years, and during this time, crime rates have risen, unemployment is at an all-time high, and housing became scarce. Even though things seemed dire under their care, they were able to put in a sewage system for Port Piscarius and establish safe trade routes from the mainland, which ended Great Kourend's isolation and allowed relations with the other kingdoms to be established. Rose's Accord. The Kourend Council has been accused of corruption since King Kourend IV and Rose's death. The Royal Society claimed that Rose going insane was too convenient, as well as the same 4 counselors winning every election. Of course, there was also Counselor Sophia Hugh's recent arrest because of her ties to the Disciples of Yama, who are a Zamorakian cult that follow the demon Yama in the Chasm of Fire. The adventurer who had aided in Sophia's arrest is informed by their leader, Martin Holt, that she escaped during a protest being held by the Royal Society in Kingstown. An investigation led by Lydia Fuller was already underway. After overturning her home, the adventurer and Lydia discover her plans to escape via Vios' ship, but are able to intercept her in time. Sophia decides to use the last card she had up her sleeve to summon the Judge of Yama, who ends up burning her for her misuse of Yama's trust and generosity, and thusly proceeds to battle the adventurer. Before Sophia's death, though, she had mentioned that the council had done something to a man and his girl, which was assumed that she meant King Kourend IV and his daughter Rose. With Counselor Andrews keeping a close eye on Lydia now, she asks the adventurer to seek Martin regarding Rose's fate. Martin ends up being arrested by Thomas Lowry during the investigation. Eventually, Rose and Counselor Liam had been discovered in a small shack at the base of Mount Caroline in the Kebos lowlands by the adventurer. Since he had been discovered, he confessed everything to them and told them that they had only done it out of necessity. He also told them that he was still in contact with the mage in order to keep treating Rose with potions. It was later discovered that the mage was actually Zamfir, Zarek's closest comrade. After surviving an encounter with him, the adventurer discovers that everything that had happened was because of him. Zamfir had redirected energy from the Dark Ultra, which had caused a decline in power and the death of Sana, who was the first Arceus citizen to die in over 1,000 years. Deciding to end Rose's suffering, the adventurer and Lydia decided to hold a funeral for her outside the shack. Because of Zamfir's involvement and the confession that Liam had given them, the adventurer asked the 5 leaders of Great Kourend to meet at Zarek's lookout to decide their next steps. After much deliberation between Trobin, Arceus, Kander Hosidius, Volcana Lovikenj, Shauna Piscarius, and Shiro Shazian, they decided a new accord will be signed into law upon a vote from people, with Kander Hosidius being crowned king of Great Kourend. This new accord would be called Rose's Accord. Thusly, their next step was to go and relieve the Kourend Council of power. After that, Rose's Accord was passed and Kander Hosidius was crowned king. During their coronation banquet, however, he was assassinated, so his son Artur Hosidius was crowned king. Martin Holt and Asteros Arceus, son of Torben, serve as an advisor to the king. Thanks for tuning in for this week's lore. Remember to drop by next week for the last episode. See you then!